Hello, my friends and enemies. Glad you are here. If you enjoyed this video, or the channel as a whole, please consider subscribing, hitting the notification bell, liking the video if you think we did a good job, and most importantly, sharing this video everywhere. We greatly appreciate it, and your support means everything to us. Thanks to everyone who already supports us. Bit of a disclaimer, I have had my doubts about the show, but this is me trying to give an unbiased, objective review of the Rings of Power. If they do something good, then I will praise them. If they do something bad, I will call them out. But I'll try to look at the show from a perspective of entertainment, lore, realism, and cinematic quality. So please bear with me. This could be a long one. Oh, and it's going to be pretty spoiler heavy, so if you want to watch the show without knowing anything, you might want to skip this one. That being said, feel free to come back after you've seen the episode. The episode starts out with Tar-Miriel holding babies and trying to sound wise with sayings that are just the writers trying to sound smart. Not to mention the use of hammer like a modern slang, as she says, "In this court we gather daily to hammer out our island's future." That is not a phrasing that would be said by anyone in Tolkien's world. Not even dwarves. But she also states it as if the ladies in her presence had no idea this was about to happen. So, it has to be for the audience's benefit. Or detriment, if it makes the audience feel dumber or insulted, you know. But there is something interesting about the scene. Ah, yes. They hit every checkbox for representation of ethnicity in this shot. Numenor had some small diversity, but not this much. This is literally the entire human race in one room. After her little smarts speech about infants, there's a rumbling, loud noise. She says a funny. At least, I think it was supposed to be a funny. The island just needs a stretch. No laughter, so that's awkward. Oh, come on. The ocean just pops up and starts pouring over the mountains and into the city. Yes, there's a pun in there on purpose. Oh, don't worry. It's just a dream. Like the whole first season. Just a taste of how the second season will start, and we beg Uru to make it happen. Cleanse this awful taste from our palate. Tar-Miriel wakes up in a chair right next to her bed. So random. I mean, a bed is more comfortable, and royalty is all about comfort. But whatever. She summons Galadriel to court. The guards, or the guildsman who got into a scrap with Halbrand, is talking about this summons and clearly hates elves and thinks poorly of the queen. He is telling them all of all the elves that are about to arrive on their shores and take their guildsman trades. Oh no, my jobs. My gerbs! Which is blatantly false. Why would the elves leave their homes to come here when they have way more resources in Middle-earth? I'm going to go out on a limb and guess this is about real-world immigration, and this guy represents every person who thinks that open borders is bad for the country or something. It's just super cringe. Ar-Pharazôn shows up and begins to speak. He riles up the crowd even more against the elves and away from the guildsmen. She will remain, as always, a kingdom of men. Even mentions building a seawall. I don't know, my guy. That kind of sounds racist.
What? That's what they were going for. What? Trump supporters? There's no way they would make this series political. Why, that would make them sound just like Ar-Pharazôn.
He then says, drinks all around, and these women carrying a few drinks shows up from around the corner. What in the flaming Dark One's eye is going on here? I suppose this was pre-planned so he could steal the show and the support of the people. If it wasn't, then it's bloody stupid to just pop in existence and claim it's a story. Elendil's daughter is watching this all take place. I wonder who will find out about this. As she watches, Ar-Pharazôn's son just waltzes up to her and starts chatting about his dad. He seems smitten. But when swapping names, the Builder's guildsman shows up to call her away. The fact they made a line such as Elendil's go from a royal line to a nobody's line is infuriating. The line of kings, dragged through the mud, where our Farazan's son doesn't know who they are. I guess to be fair to the showrunners, I don't know who she is either. Meanwhile, the summons is going on, and Galadriel lays her case before Tar-Miriel in a much more diplomatic tone. It's almost like they had different writers and directors than previously. Galadriel wants Tar-Miriel to back Halbrand and his claim to the Southland throne, and to revive the alliance between men and elves to defeat Sauron. Despite her attempt at diplomacy, her request is denied. Oh, she mad. She calls on the King of Numenor, Tar-Miriel's father, to hear her request, and we get the classic line, "There is a tempest in me." Well, there goes diplomacy. That went well. Halbrand pokes fun at Galadriel. Don't tell me. Tavern brawl. Sedition. Isildur is on a ship and gets a creepy whisper from a lady to the west side of the island. And I don't know why it's so hard for people to end up on the west side of the island. Just go there. It's not like it's 1,000 miles away. It's maybe a day's ride at most. Can't be too difficult. But no, he hears the captain say, pull! So he just lets go of the rope he's holding, and because he lets go of the rope, him and his two friends are kicked out of the Sea Guard. Why are his friends kicked out? They were following orders. But his friends are mad at him because he wants to go west, the true Numenor. This was a writing mess to cause drama. That's literally it. Isildur didn't earn his place in the Sea Guard recruits, but the others had to work hard to earn their place. And Isildur is sad about his dead mother. They throw hands, and he walks away. Arondir, how you been, buddy? Oh, your friends are all dead and you're tied up with chains? Sounds like you had a bad night. Looks like Adar decides to show his face, literally and figuratively. An elf with what seems to be a burn scar on the left side of his face. Adar approaches the orcs that Arondir had stabbed in the throat and kneels down, and the orc seemed happy to see him as he gurgles blood, and he seems happy to see the orc. And he stabbed him. Arondar and Adar have, or Adar, whatever, have a chat, and Adar tells him that he would need to be a god to change things, and he isn't one. Yet. He sends Arondir to go tell the men from Bronwyn's village something. At the tower, they have all gathered the villagers from all of the villages that haven't been swallowed up by the orcs. But food is running low. Butcher Guy tries to one-up Bronwyn, and then Theo tries to show up saying they can sneak back into the town and get more rations during the day and then get back out. Bronwyn says no and calls to send out the hunters, but Theo is causing trouble for her. Theo and Knife Ears headed into the town and spot dead animals in the fields. Knife Ears wants to leave, but Theo calls him chicken, so he stays. Works every time. Theo has the broken sword on him concealed. Theo wants to go into the tavern, but Knife Ears doesn't want to go, so Theo goes alone. His body language has so much teen angst in it, it's definitely a CW show. I do wonder why a village would pack up and leave and not take its food with them. Like, the one thing they would need to survive and they leave it behind. I mean, if there was any, like, livestock or anything surviving, you would take it with you, especially if you know your destination and you're going to go there anyway. It's just like, just take them with you. Like, what? It's better to have them to just leave them there to be slaughtered. But clouds start covering the sun because who checks to see if clouds are going to block the sun before walking into a village that could be crawling with orcs? Knife Ears notices and freaks out and grabs the wheelbarrow and takes off. Theo begins to regret entering the tavern and spots an orc behind him. I have no idea why the orc is just standing there. It could have grabbed him or killed him before he even turned. They make orcs super stealthy for some reason. The orc takes a swing at Theo, but Theo brings up the sword he was hiding. He blocks the attack. How? They just established in the second episode that an orc can fling a heavy wooden table across the room hard. How is a scrawny teenager going to stop that kind of power? Come to think of it, how did any full-grown man? The orc is surprised and asks where he got it. In response, Theo jams the hilt into his arm and the blade gets longer. This orc freaks out. But then the orc tells him to give it here. Theo cuts off some of his fingers and runs. Orc runs out after him and calls for the others that he found it with a perfect Brooklyn thug accent. I'm not even joking. They start fanning out. Theo hid in the well, but no sign of the sword. Orc comes to get a drink from the well bucket, and we get a water splashing camera scene. I really hate this modern twist on fantasy. The orc drops the bucket and hits Theo in the face. He cries out in pain. The orc returns to the well, but no Theo. That's them fighting. And he's in the well. Theo comes out of the water, gasping and splashing, which should have drawn the orc back, but doesn't because plot armor. It appears that the building that Celebrimbor wanted to make is beginning to be built. Elrond is happy to see elves and dwarves working together, and Celebrimbor tells him that he looks a lot like his father, who had told Celebrimbor that his future would lie in Elrond's hands. But Celebrimbor is unsettled by something. It seems Durin is avoiding or hiding from Celebrimbor. What could he be up to? Elrond went to visit Durin's home. You know, the one that he was forever banished from for losing the rock smashing contests. Oh, and Elrond's still wearing the same, clothes from months ago. So is Celebrimbor, to point that out, but yeah, great. Well, he meets Disa and the kids are in the background playing, but Elrond knows something is up. Disa is lying to him about Durin's whereabouts. Disa meets up with Durin and talks about misdirecting Elrond, and they're making good progress with the old mine. Of course, Elrond is listening in with his elf ears. He finds out where Durin is headed. Elrond finds a hidden passage that has a magical tap to the tune of a lullaby. Not even kidding. Durin shows up and calls Elrond a spy and that he wants it for himself. Elrond has no idea what he's talking about, or claims to. Elrond hits him with the trusty old 1-2 about friendship not having secrets. Durin considers, but then he says he needs Elrond's oath. A new ore that Disa detected while resonating singing. Mithril. This one you actually do roll the R, ironically. I don't actually think they did, though, which is kind of weird. Elrond seems to be entranced by it, probably because the elves love shiny objects that remind them of the stars. Elrond goes to give it back to Durin, but Durin tells him to keep it as a token of their friendship. Then a rumble happens, and the mine seems to have collapsed or something. Back in Numenor, Elendil's daughter is drafting a paper, but apparently isn't supposed to be. She is supposed to be cleaning the floors and the goblets. She's called to do these tasks, but in her haste, she runs into Ar-Pharazôn's son and spills water on him. He offers to wash the floor, and she can wash the goblets, and the first one done pays for dinner. She says that she is not in the habit of going off with strange young men. He quickly responds with, "Very wise. If I see any, I'll let you know." Yes, this is a thing. I will not tell you how hard I groaned. I'm pretty sure that you probably heard it even on the other side of the world. Galadriel is pacing in her cell, and Halbrand begins to advise her on how to talk to Tar-Miriel. Another look at the armor. At first glance, it seems like it would be passable, but looking harder, it looks pretty cheap. Ar-Pharazôn shows up with news that Galadriel will be shipped off this very night, back to Middle-earth with an armed escort. Which they should have done in the first place, but the plot demands it. So Galadriel outsmarts the guards and flings them into her cell, locking it behind them. Really? Is there ever an end to this girl power fantasy? It's not the way of Tolkien. It's an attempt to put the writer's fantasies of overpowering men, outsmarting them, and moving forward in triumph, just in a highly unrealistic way. Still not Tolkien. Elendil's kids hang out to chat, and his daughter learns everything about him being kicked out of the Sea Guard. Then guards burst in looking for Galadriel. Galadriel is seriously climbing the tower on the outside where the old king is. How does she know that it is the correct tower? There are so many towers. How does she know he isn't in a dungeon? How does she know he isn't in another city? How? Well, she's Galadriel, of course. She can climb a tower she has never scaled before in the middle of the night in a dress and no climbing gear, not even using her dagger. She must be a goat. The incline must be at least 92 degrees. Props to you if you got that one. But of course, Tar-Miriel is at the top by her father's bedside, waiting for her, and a garrison of troops down below are waiting to escort Galadriel to her ship. But Galadriel has a moment to win Tar-Miriel over and wants to know why she abandoned her father's ways. We find out there was an insurrection when her father announced he wanted to return to the old ways that would keep them in the good graces of the Valar. A Palantir. 7 total. The other 6 lost or hidden. Pretty sure that didn't happen for a long time after this. But okay. Galadriel touches it and sees the future of Numenor being wiped out by the oceans. I just need to say that I hate how they pronounce Palantir. It's so hard for them to just do it normally. Like, they try so hard. Just like all the rolling R's. They talk about the coming of Galadriel and beginning the downfall of Numenor, which I don't know why her presence would be required for the fall of Numenor, since Numenor seems to be on the downslide anyway. But, you know, the island was gifted to them by the Valar. Correct. It could be taken away at any time. Also correct. The virtue by which they were given the island was their loyalty to the elves. Incorrect. It was because their participation in the war against Morgoth. And once Morgoth was defeated, they were awarded the island and extra long life. So they could live 400 years instead of only, 80 or 100. So Galadriel tries to get Tar-Miriel on her side by telling her to choose not the path of fear, but that of faith. What does that even mean? There is no faith in Arda, let alone in Tolkien's works. This is the writers trying to be fancy with words again. They keep showing us that they aren't very good at it. Tar-Miriel declines Galadriel's offer with seeming regret. Over at the tower for the elves, or the elf garrison, I should say, Bronwyn's hunters can't catch much. Seems the animals fled. We have to be told that, since the writers think we are too stupid to figure that out. That is the theme of the season, after all. So Knife Ears shows up at the gates with the wheelbarrow. By the way, Knife Ears' actual name is Rowan. I just like calling him Knife Ears because that's what he's known for. It's full dark, and they didn't even think about that before they left. When asked, he says Theo should be just right behind him. Theo is still in the well, but the orcs can't seem to find him, so he finally climbs out of the well, but still no sign of the sword. He then begins to stealthily bypass the orcs. He still has a gash on his leg from the fight with the orc, and that an orc almost catches his scent, but another orc calls him away, saving Theo. Theo grabs a bundle of food and begins stumbling around the village, avoiding orcs that should have easily spotted him. Theo thinks he outsmarted them and gets nabbed by the one from earlier. He wants to know where the sword is. He then tells him he's going to cut off his arm to loosen his lips. When the blow falls, it's through the orc. Arondir has arrived! They flee through the trees while being pursued by the orcs. Arondir leading Theo, who still has a gash on his leg. And there's no way that Theo would be able to keep up. The orcs would have gotten to them at some point. Arondir tells Theo to keep going, but then forces Theo to the ground to keep an arrow from killing him. Then we get the scene. The arrow catching and returning scene. The arrow would have landed in Theo's back, but Arondir caught it in the nick of time. Is there anything that he can't do? The writers don't think so. Theo gets up, but then stops, startled. His mother is coming towards him with a sickle in hand like a weapon. Oh no! This as soon as I saw it. Like, They run and get out of the trees. The darkness of the forest behind them, and the sun breaks through the clouds. Morning. At least the orcs kept firing arrows at them. I figured they would have just forgotten about that. Credit where credit's due, I suppose. Now in the dwarven mines, Disa sings her song to plea with the mountain to release the dwarves in the shaft that collapsed. Because mountains hear things, apparently. Like, mountains are actually magical beings that you can just plead with. I mean, they'd have better chance of, like, pleading to Ale to just, like, hey, could you come over here and, release stuff? Which I doubt he would do, but they could at least try. In her eyes, if it hadn't been for Elrond going down there, Durin would have been in that shaft. She apologizes for lying to him, but he is having none of it. He is fine with it because it was for his friend. Durin shows up, announcing that the last miner had been pulled out of the mine, alive. But his father had shut down the whole operation related to that vein. Durin is furious with his father, the king, because of this. And he wants nothing to do with the old gods because of the outcome, and he wants nothing to do with his father. The next part that comes was a bit of a surprise to me. I was caught off guard completely. Elrond speaks up, and we hear about how his father sailed to Valinor single-handedly, which is false. He actually went with his wife, Elwing, after Feanor's sons attacked the havens of Sirion after the fall of Gondolin. They were trying to get Elwing's Silmaril, but Elrond's father, Eärendil, and his mother, Elwing, used the Silmaril to guide them to Valinor to beseech the Valar to make war upon Melkor and to receive mercy and aid from them. They grant his request, and he sails on a flying ship with a Silmaril on his chest, becoming a star. But as Elrond speaks of his father, he wonders what his father would think of him. Would he be proud of his successes or disappointed in his failures? But he realized that it wouldn't matter just as long as he could talk to his father just once. This hits Durin hard. Durin is told not to waste time bickering with his father because he never knows when he won't be able to speak to him again. While this isn't a Tolkien-type scene, it was the best scene of the episode. It ended with some humor that made me chuckle slightly about how they met. I was surprised again. I know, 2 times in a single episode. Durin goes and sees his father and apologizes for being proud and stubborn. His father tells him of some belief dwarves have about a newly crowned king getting the knowledge and wisdom of the prior kings imparted into them. Not really sure that's lore, but it can be ignored easily enough. But then they have a wonderful father-son moment. I really liked it. The king thinks Gil-galad is up to something. Durin agrees with him. Then he sends him to Lindon with Elrond. It's their intuition, you see. Since Gil-galad hasn't been Gil-galad since the show started, I would have to agree with them. However, Gil-galad doesn't technically know about Elrond and Celebrimbor's dealings with the dwarves, so there's that. But I'm sure Gil-galad is still up to something. Bronwyn has a moment with Arondir. Now Arondir gives the message to Bronwyn that Adar gave him. The people must forswear all claims to this land and swear fealty to Adar, and they may live. If not, then Adar will come for them at the tower. I really hope they aren't trying to pull another Helm's Deep here. That would be foolish. Theo still has the sword, but the blade that grew out is a stub again. Can someone explain this to me? Is this the first prototype of a lightsaber? Is this Theo Skywalker? Maybe Anakin and Theo are half-brothers, but are separated by a galaxy far, far away? Explains why Anakin's dad is missing. Better fantasy than this flaming garbage. So Butcherman throws Theo a bottle of water and then reveals that he knows that Theo stole the hilt from his barns. Theo tries to deny it, but Butcherman brushes it off and shows him a mark on his arm like what Theo has. Now, when he shows this mark on his arm, and this is the same one that, Theo has, which we'll get to in a second, but it's like, does everyone just stab themselves with the hilt on purpose to work the sword or something? Like, is this a thing? Like, does everyone just like, I wonder what happens if I take this hilt and just shank it into my forearm? What could possibly go wrong? I don't know, but he goes on by like, do you know what that is? It is no sword, it is power, fashioned for our ancestors by his master's own hand, a beautiful servant, he who was lost but shall return. Have you heard of him, lad? Have you heard of Sauron? You know, oh my. So Sauron is now a Southlander who served Morgoth, and he shall return. Looks can be deceiving, eh? This has ceased being lore and is now just straight up silly. Sauron was a Maiar, but that of a higher order than that of the Maiar that came later. He was a servant of Aule, the smith of the Valar. But no, he's just a Southland king who served Morgoth. This awful CGI again. Oh, come off it! Get some actual skill in the CGI department. Adar is feeding the warg, and an orc tells him that it is in the tower. Speaking of the sword. Galadriel is being escorted to the boat she'll be taking. Tar-Miriel is off to make an announcement to her people in the square, and on her way, the petals of the white tree begin to fall. We hear her speech about the faithful and the petals falling from the white tree. She tells her audience that she is personally going to escort the elf back to Middle-earth to aid in the war in the Southlands to free them from the evil's grip. We randomly get an image of Halbrand in the city, not in a cell. No idea why. Did she just let him go? Did he break out? Don't know. It just happened. Our Farazan announces that the ships will leave in 10 days. Elendil is in a square calling for those who would escort the queen on her voyage. Isildur's friends volunteer, and so does Isildur. Then more and more people volunteer until there's a flood of them. The strange thing is that women were raising their hands. In the lore, the women hated being even out of sight of land and preferred to stay on it. The men were seafarers and adventurers. The only time the women left Numenor was to establish colonies. This was established by Tolkien. And that ends the episode. Didn't get much in the way of what was going on, but it had more going for it than the previous episodes. Not that it takes much. But the one blessing about this episode is that it didn't have any Harfoots in it. The music was even a little better than the past episodes. So hopefully something will happen before I die of boredom from watching this series. A couple rays of light is that the episode kept it from being a total disaster. Doubt that'll last, but who knows? What did you think of the episode? Are you engaged? Does it hold up or down to your expectations? Let us know down in the comments. Thanks again for sticking around. Remember to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. But most importantly, please share this video everywhere. Thank you for your support. Walk in the light, my friends.